Hello, I am Laura Danielson. Welcome to our podcast on immigration law under the new Trump administration. Honestly, we're all kind of holding our breath, wondering what is coming down the immigration path once Donald Trump takes office. There is a palpable fear out there among many of our clients, and people are a bit on edge. Part of this is due to the president-elect's campaign promises, in which he said that he will begin deportations on day one. Another is due to his 10-point plan listed on his website. Here are some of the key items as they impact our clients. In the beginning, the promise was to deport all 11 million estimated undocumented immigrants. But as reality has set in, the focus is really more on those who've committed crimes. And Donald Trump has said he's estimated that to be around 2 million deportations that he wants to see. He has also promised to repeal DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which has given temporary status to an estimated 650,000 young people, and which I'll talk about more in a moment. He has also talked about an overhaul of employment-based immigration in favor of U.S. workers and eliminating and renegotiating NAFTA, which Bob will talk about next. Increased enforcement is definitely on the agenda as well. While this relates to border security and the idea of building a wall, it also relates to employment and compliance, which Lon will be discussing. We've heard quite a bit about extreme vetting of certain groups, whether they be refugees or people entering on visas. Deborah is going to go into more detail on these potential policy changes and the impact on employees. But before we go into the details, let's back up a step and consider how much a president can actually do. Immigration law is administrative, which means that it falls under the executive branch of our government to enforce our immigration laws. Congress, however, still makes those laws, and most major changes cannot occur without new laws being passed. And remember that even though Congress is now controlled in both houses by Republicans, the party is far from lined up to act quickly or cohesively. There really are still many differing points of view, and there's a great deal of dissent about immigration policy that's on both sides of the aisle. Furthermore, Congress must vote to fund various initiatives, such as increased enforcement. Remember that most immigrants still have a right to a hearing before an immigration judge before they're going to be deported. And increasing deportations will surely require additional funding for both enforcement personnel and for judges. Now, immigration regulations are drafted by the administrative agencies under the executive branch, like USCIS, to implement those laws that Congress passes, but they are subject to various rulemaking procedures. The tone is set by those in charge as to the adjudications and implementation, and to that end it really does matter who is being proposed to run the ship. John Kelly has been chosen to run the Department of Homeland Security, and Jeff Sessions to be our Attorney General, and both obviously have been chosen to implement a very strict immigration agenda. So stay tuned to see what happens with both of them. I'm not going to go into details right now, but keep your eye on that. Stay tuned. But still, government regulations cannot be what we call ultra vires, or outside of the actual legal framework enacted by Congress. If they are, that's what our courts are for. And historically, our courts have given a great deal of deference to Congress and its plenary powers to legislate in the area of immigration. So there is not a carte blanche for the executive branch to just move ahead and enact really strict immigration regulations. Finally, the executive, which which really means the president, has no inherent powers over immigration laws. So there really is a limit as to what he would be able to do without congressional support. So, what might President-elect Donald Trump actually be able to do immediately or within, let's say, the first 100 days? First of all, he could rescind DACA, which was an executive action by Obama. Basically, an executive action is a directive to a federal agency by the president to do certain things that are still within the legislative framework. Trump has the authority to rescind any of Obama's executive actions, including DACA. But will he really? It's estimated that nearly 90% of all DACA recipients are currently working, and that terminating the program could lead to hundreds of billions of dollars of lost gross domestic product over the next 10 years. DACA, in my opinion, DACA is likely to be rescinded, but Donald Trump has recently softened his tune, and some are suggesting that Congress may actually pass a form of DREAM Act that will protect the DACA recipients. And we don't really know what this would look like, but it's interesting that it's even being discussed. And so stay tuned for that, because that is something that could actually happen very soon with the new Congress. Secondly, Donald Trump could also redirect enforcement and deportation initiatives under our current agencies. And Lon is going to discuss that in much further detail. Fourth, the president has broad unilateral discretion to determine refugee policies and the number that we take in each year. So keep your eye on what happens there. For example, with Syrian refugees or others from the Middle East. We've heard a lot of discussion about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see a real reduction in refugees, particularly from Muslim countries. And finally, as far as my part of this discussion, the president also has the power to bar access to the United States for specific immigrants or groups, particularly if he believes they pose a threat. It is not as likely that this will involve a blanket ban on Muslims, for example, per se, because that would be considered discriminatory, and there would be a whole host of legislative, court actions that would likely follow. But there could be a real bar on specific groups, and at the very least, a tightening of border restrictions. And Deborah is going to discuss with us how we expect this to play out. So, okay, Bob, please tell us some more about expected revisions to employment and regulatory changes.